Okay, let's start. My name is Alon Rosenthal. I'm Secupy co-founder and CEO. And with me is Ulf. Ulf, can you introduce yourself to the team?
Yeah, I'm the chief security strategist, a founder of a couple of different data security companies. My uh, background is from IBM, databases and security, and I am an inventor of 72 or 73 uh, patents in database security, including tokenization and a couple of related areas.
Yeah. And today's webinar, we're going to talk about zero code encryption or zero code tokenization. And really the reason for that is that as Ulf's inventions, the tokenization are being more widely used due to regulations, due to solvency requirements, data privacy breaches, right? All of those different reasons are making large organizations invest more and more in adopting tokenization encryption. The challenge is shifted from the encryption tokenization algorithm themselves into how can we apply them at scale across our IT landscape, applications, databases, cloud data platforms, and how can we do it in an efficient and codeless way as much as possible. As we see adoption of those technologies through the means of APIs, right? Calling a tokenization API requires code changes. And hence, what in Sekipy we see more and more is customers putting focus and attention, not only the fact that data is tokenized, but also more importantly is how we're going to apply the tokenization. How are we going to apply the encryption in a way that requires zero code changes? Um, Ulf, any comments about that?
Yeah, I think you made a very good point here. I have been implementing API based UDF database based encryption and tokenization for many years. So I have seen the pain and issues that our customers are having. So I'm thinking that it will be very interesting to hear you talk about zero code.
Yes. And I can even start by just showing how eventually it looks like from an application perspective. Uh, let's say that we have an application and we need to tokenize or encrypt few columns. What does it entails? What does it requires? So in a nutshell, the way that it is being implemented is by installing what we call a centralized server. In this case, this is the server in this diagram, right? This is where the keys are held. This is where the attributes are being pulled. Why do we need attributes? Because we want to decrypt or tokenize the data only to authorized users. So definitely we need to know who is authorized, who's not. Also, we need to know what columns are encrypted and tokenized, which not, right? And then we need to apply those policies, and eventually we enforce those with those zero code enforcers to protect our applications, whether they are running on premise, on an Oracle database, or even on Teradata, or in the cloud in front of Snowflake or Databricks or RDS, or even NoSQL stores like Mongo, Dynamo, CosmoDB, and others. So the way that the zero code enforcers work is by having this central management server, and then the enforcers would be pulling the policies, the keys, and applying the encryption tokenization in the application themselves. What does it mean? It means that, for example, here, and this is a demo application that we are using. It's an open source application called OpenBravo, used by large organizations such as Nike and others. An open source CRM application. And of course, as an open source CRM application, we cannot change its code. We cannot come and call an API when users are running a select request to a token value, because we need to tokenize it, or the other way around, where we're inserting or updating a record in a database, we need to call the API to tokenize the data that we are inserting to the database, or decrypting or encrypting it when we are updating a record in a database. In order to do that with zero code changes, because we cannot change the code of this application, what Occupy has done is simply we are putting our agent on this application. In this case, it's an open source Java application running on in this case Spring Boot. Similarly, it can run on .NET or on WebSphere, or running even on mainframes. And once we put the agent on this application, by defining policies, which I will show in a moment, by defining policies, when the user logs into this application and he would look at some sensitive information to do his job, Secupy will apply the tokenization or the decryption on a need-to-know basis, so the user can see the data. Either in this case, you see the commercial name is tokenized, but the text ID is encrypted. And this is done without touching the code of OpenBravo and without defining external functions in the databases. Now, this is what we call the zero code enforcer, which is an agent that we put on those applications, on tools, on Power BI, Tableau, Click. And what the agent is doing, it is applying tokenization, detokenization, encryption, decryption policies on select, insert, updates that the application is running against the underlying database. From the DB2s, Oracle, SQL Server, up the stack to RDS, and even NoSQL data stores. That's really how it all looks like, a transparent experience by the application users, and zero code changes is required. And that's really the next evolution of the adoption, the wide adoption of tokenization and encryption into large organizations where there's no limitation, there's no code changes required, and this, of course, speeds up the implementation and the benefit of doing tokenization and encryption in those applications, tools, analytics environments.
So, Alon, can I ask you? You mentioned APIs, SDKs, external functions, or UDFs. Can you explain a little bit about how are they different? What is?
Sure. So all of those options, APIs. API means that a developer would need to go into the application source code, and whenever the application is running a select request from a tokenized column, he needs to call an API that will receive the result set from this select request from the database where the column is tokenized, take the result set, and call through an API a tokenization service to detokenize those values. So the user of this application need to see the data in clear, would be able to see that. Otherwise, without calling the API, without changing the application code, the application user will see the data tokenized, right? Because that's the values that exist in the database. Because tokenization means that we will take the column and then tokenize it. For example, when we talk about the UDFs, UDFs is a technique where the database itself, you can define an external function or a user-defined function. That's UDF, user-defined function. It allows you to do it in Teradata. It allows you to do it in Snowflake or in Redshift or in Oracle, where you can define a function in a database, and once a user runs a select request using a reporting tool to Teradata, the select request will be processed by Teradata, and because you will be calling a tokenization function, or in this case, the tokenization function in the database in Teradata, the Teradata will be calling the tokenization service, taking the result set and the tokenizing it. But the issue here is that the end user needs to be aware that there is such a external function. Otherwise, if he just runs select the star from this table, he will see the data tokenized because the data is tokenized in the table. So he needs to be aware that the report needs now to call a user-defined function, a function that will be applying the tokenization to his result set, which means that now the reports, the queries that are run on Teradata in this example, or Snowflake or others, need to be aware that there is the requirement to invoke the tokenization function. Of course, we do not want everybody to be able to call the function, because if everybody can call the tokenization function, it means that everybody can see the data in clear text, which is counterintuitive to the reason that we're applying the tokenization, which is to control access to the tokenized data only to authorized users. Right? So not only that we need to ensure that the function exists, we need also to apply a means to have the users change the reports to invoke the function. We also need to ensure that the users who are invoking the function can do it on a need-to-know basis. So we need to control the usage of the function. Okay? So all of these basically are changes that require to be implemented to every column that we decide to tokenize in Snowflake or in Teradata, in Redshift or BigQuery. Our approach again is no code changes, zero code changes also to the analytics environment, which means that by simply pointing the user through a SecuPy transparent gateway, the SecuPy transparent gateway in the middle will apply the tokenization and the tokenization when needed, which means that invoking the tokenization UDF or external function will be carried out by SecuPy in a segregated way, okay, ensuring that nobody can just invoke the function, but accessing the Teradata or the Snowflake will be done using this transparent gateway to enforce full segregation of duties to the function. So nobody can just detokenize the data by invoking the function call or changing privileges to the function, because access to that is done through the Secure Python Span gateway. So that's with when we are trying to implement tokenization using a UDF, a user-defined function, or using an external function.
So, Alon, can I ask you? Uh, some vendors are using a gateway approach. How is that different?
True. So, so we also believe that customers should have the option to choose. The option to choose, namely, should a gateway be used or an agent be used, and there's limitations and there's pros and cons. When you talk about applications, sometimes people will suggest what is called an HTTP level gateway. An HTTP level gateway means that you will be required to define regular expressions in order to match, for example, a credit card and apply the tokenization on the credit card itself. Um, there, the gateway will be configured between the end user and the application server. Okay, let me try to find maybe a diagram for that. Right? So this will be done between the application here. So let's say that I have the SecuPy, a user that wants to tokenize some data, right? Uh, so a gateway can be positioned here, right, between the user and the application. The problem here by configuring a gateway here in this position is the fact that you only see HTTP traffic. You do not have an understanding of the actual tables and column structure because this is like an HTTP request that is far behind the request that the application server is sending to the database. When other solutions are proposing a gateway, you need to be aware of what is the gateway, where it is actually gatewaying the user traffic. If the gateway is positioned between the end user and the application, this is the wrong place to put a gateway because here there's a lot of fluctuation. There's no context of the database itself. There's no understanding what is a table or column because here it's all HTTP requests that can change frequently and are very hard to accurately find the values that we want to tokenize the tokenized. What we suggest is that SecuPy provides both the ability to put an agent on the application, like what I've shown you here, or we can also suggest putting an agent, but putting the agent here, putting the agent between the application and the database. Why here it's much better? Because here SecuPy sees also the tables and the column names that are queried. So by simply saying, I want to tokenize access to my social security number column, with such a single policy, I can apply in an accurate way the tokenization and the encryption. Unlike if I put it here, where I don't have any ability to define what is a column, what is a database table, because here those requests do not have any context of the actual underlying tables and column names that are used to answer this specific request. So that's why SecuPy we provide both a tokenization encryption that we can do on the application server using an instrumentation agent. That's an example of what I showed you. Or alternatively, we offer customers for specific use cases to put SecuPy here as a transparent gateway, but a gateway between the application and the database, not a gateway between the user and the application.
Hmm.
That's like the main differentiation of doing that, let's call it in the right location on the application server or on the database network and not on the HTTP. Of course, also here there's pros and cons in both options. Um, the pros of putting SecuPy here is, of course, in a sense, transparency. You don't need to put anything on the application server. The limitation of putting SecuPy here on the transparent gateway between the application and the database is sometimes the lack of user context. Because sometimes the application will use something which is called service account. You see it here, right? The application will connect to the database with a single service account. And by using a transparent gateway here, also you don't know who's the actual user, right? So that's why we offer an alternative, which is putting SecuPy on the application server, because on the application server, we know who's the user, what is the data request, what is the data response, and the user response. So here we have much broader context that is unique. We have the username, we have the application username, we have the application role, we have the HTTP request, we even have the SQL request, and even the data itself. And that's why here there's a benefit of using the SecuPy agent compared to the SecuPy gateway. But here these are things that always when we are helping our global 2000 customers, we would discuss that and they have the ability to choose which option best serves them. Because again, there's pros and cons in those two options, and that allows us to align better with the customer requirements because of those flexibilities.
Hmm. That makes sense. So you talked about the risk of data corruption
Yes.
with different approaches,
Sure.
and you are offering alternatives where you actually can see the real user,
Mhm. Mhm.
and you also have the option to see the context of the data or tables, the database context.
Mhm.
That's interesting.
Yes, yes. And by the way, talking about alternatives, and we talked about the risk of corruption. Of course, in any tokenization encryption project, because we are changing the data in the databases, there is a risk of corruption by design because you're taking a value like a name or social security number and you are tokenizing it. And if you are unaware the data has been tokenized, there is a risk
Mm.
because the applications, the users, everybody expecting the data to be in clear, but you have been tokenizing it, and hence tokenization always carries with it a risk, and that's why we, as we are trying to again provide practical options, in some cases where there is an option and from a risk perspective, it would make sense. We offer also what is called logical or dynamic encryption, like dynamic masking. Dynamic encryption means that we will not encrypt the data in the database. Data in the database will be the same. We will not touch the data in the databases, but we will apply the tokenization or the encryption by dynamic way using the agent. So the data database keeps intact. We do not change it. There's no risk of corruption. There's no risk of any changes to the data in the database. The only thing we are doing dynamic encryption. So unauthorized users will see the data tokenized, but authorized users simply will not do anything and they will see the data in clear text. So by looking at a more, let's call it um, practical options to offer large compliance initiatives, we would offer those options of applying dynamic encryption as well. So customers can choose some columns like credit card. Of course, we want to tokenize the credit card. There's no question about it because it's also rarely being used in its clear text form. But maybe account number, maybe client IDs, those columns are massively used by the organization in many places. Account number in a bank, it's the main primary value that all systems are using. So trying to tokenize an account number can cause severe consequences because you need to do it across hundreds of applications. For those types of columns, we would recommend to use dynamic tokenization and not tokenization itself. So that's like a way that we would balance the tokenization and the dynamic tokenization. We will balance those based on if it's a mainframe or if it's Snowflake, if it's a column that is massively being used or rarely being decrypted or tokenized, right? If it's a closed environment or an open environment, right? What is the risk posture? So based on those criteria, we can decide which column we want to tokenize, which column we want to dynamically tokenize. That's the balance that we talk about to provide a proactive way to gain quick success with minimal amount of effort and changes to those applications.
Yeah. So you talked about uh, data corruption issues, and what about sensitivity to network protocols? How is that handled?
Sure. So because we put the Secure agent on the applications and not on the network, right? We don't put it on the network here, right? Or put it here on the network. This allows us to ensure that any changes of those protocols, let's say if you decide to encrypt, right? We don't need to, when we're sitting here, right? We need to terminate the SSL, right? Because the gateway in between the user and the application, you need to terminate the SSL or the TLS and invoke it again, right? So by those options that we offer by putting agent on the application itself, there's no issue about network because we are not listening to the network traffic whether it's encrypted or in one way or the other, we don't need to terminate the encryption to restate the encryption, right? And hence, of course, every encryption termination has its own risks, and that's why
Mm.
this option of putting agents on the applications is helping with those limitations, those issues.
So you talked about the different issues with different approaches here. What is the cost of deployment, which one is more time consuming?
Yeah, of course. So we always recommend customers to start with dynamic tokenization, dynamic encryption, because that's the easiest and the fastest, right? Because we don't touch the databases, and we are checking the box of tokenization, doing it dynamically. So we always recommend customers start with observability, start with monitoring, start with access control, start with dynamic encryption tokenization, and then in specific columns that there's no any, let's call it compensating control that we can achieve using dynamic encryption, using monitoring, using functional access control. In those specific columns, apply the zero code tokenization. In everything else, try again, due to those issues, try to avoid it and use as much as possible other access control and identification functions that we talked about.
I think at some point I've heard you talk about the difference between the low cost with zero code and the legacy approaches that could be. Uh, would you say it can be 10 times higher cost?
Sometimes it can be even more, right? Than 10 times more. Why? Because yeah, if you can change the code, you need, three, four developers for at least few weeks time to go through the sales cycle, open the application, change those calls. Of course, you need to go through testing, then development, test, UAT, and then roll it out to production. This, of course, takes weeks and requires the attention of developers and
Mm.
time and cost implications to that. The zero code approach allows you to do it without any changes. So you don't need those developers. Those developers can help the business be more agile. Yeah, so 10 times is a good way to look at the benefit of using Secupy zero code. But keep note that there are applications that you cannot even not change.
Mm.
Third-party applications, right? Applications that have been there for the last 5 years' time, and developers, right, are not there any longer, right? They're doing other projects. They have been moved to other departments, right? Developers in some applications are not available, or it's even a closed application, like an open source application I showed you. In those cases, it's not even 10 times. It simply is impossible to do it with any other API or UDFs, right? In those cases, the only viable approach for those third party, for those package applications, off the shelf application is doing that with an agent approach.
So uh, when you talk about modifying applications, it can take a lot of time, require a lot of um, skills that are hard to come by.
Mhm. Sure.
Um, so it, when you talk about zero code uh, and compare it to API UDF,
Mhm.
um, how, how would you monitor and secure non-encrypted sensitive data? Would that be a problem with legacy approaches versus zero code?
Yeah. I would try to balance that as much as possible, right? Balancing the different options that we talk about. For example, applying dynamic encryption as much as possible, dynamic tokenization, applying fine-grained access controls, applying even auditing and monitoring. Sometimes monitoring access to the data can be seen as a compensating control for some types of regulations,
Mm.
right? So auditing, monitoring, that would be a good start, and then applying fine-grained access control by ensuring that access is done based on different user attributes, and then going and implementing dynamic tokenization, dynamic encryption for columns, and last and not least would be to really do the tokenization on the databases themselves for credit card values, for example, right? And this would be right, another way to protect the data, but wouldn't be the prime way I would use for huge scale implementation deployments. I would really start with the first remediation capabilities, the monitoring, the dynamic masking, the dynamic encryption, and try to get quick wins, right? So I would start with monitoring, start with dynamic masking, dynamic encryption, already show management we have done a substantial leap ahead toward data protection. Once this was implemented, I would also go to do some tokenization and encryption, but again, to very few columns after already we have shown management success. Data is being protected, data access is being controlled in a fine-grained way, right? Encryption tokenization is being implemented dynamically, and the last step of the project would be also to cherry pick few columns to apply the tokenization in the databases themselves.
Hmm. So you gave quite a number of examples of cost, skills, time to implement, and supported features. Anything else you would like to add finally about the how to look at the differences?
Yeah. So um, data security, right? It's really the next evolution of security, right? Network security have been matured and have been really proliferated, and endpoint network security, right? The Palo Altos and the checkpoints, and right, the industry has been evolving over many years in those security dimensions. Data security has been left behind, right? And it was left behind due to the complexity of protecting data. And now with those new innovations, this zero code tokenization, the ability to apply different types of controls, like the dynamic tokenization, the access control, the monitoring, right? Now it's the time really to accelerate the adoption of data security, which both me and Ulf, we have been preaching for the last 20 years, right? So this is the time. We have now the ability to do it in a frictionless way, and looking forward, serving our large customers that Ulf and myself have been working with over the years, really to take them leap ahead into becoming data secure and data resilient.
Mm. So Alon, if people would like to find out more, where should I go?
Sure.
Your website or
Yeah,
LinkedIn
yeah, the
or
easiest way, all channels are open and occupied, both, of course, through LinkedIn, website, secupi.com, right? Just book a demo, for example, always a good option, and then we can have a 30-minute call and discuss where you are in the data security journey and how we can help you ramp up your tokenization and encryption capabilities on your platforms.
Hmm. So I think you said your approach can be 10 times, um, maybe 25 times lower in cost.
Yes. Yes.
And also you mentioned that development skills uh, are not that critical with your approach.
Yes. Because we have those agents that require zero developers, right?
Mm.
They are simply, you put the jar file on your WebSphere or Tomcat or DLL on your .NET application, etc. You have a very broad platform support, and basically you can start defining columns that you want to tokenize, you want to mask, you want to audit and monitor.
I think we are maybe running out of time here, Alan. Anything, any final remarks you would like to add?
Um, you know, um, uh, this is the time. Uh, uh, the regulations, solvency, breaches. Both me and I'm sure Ulf, both of us see that, and hence those things cannot be solved by putting more network security, more endpoint security. This is a time to focus on data. We see the growth of interest, the growth of adoption of large organizations in applying data security, and hence the innovations that both you, Ulf, and myself have been creating, right? This is the time, and this is really a exciting era to do that. And Ulf, really thank you for being here and also being part of that of this evolution.
Thank you for inviting me,
Mm,
and maybe we can do more
mm,
of this going forward, because I believe that this new approach uh, will require some education. People need to understand the differences that you talk about today, because it's uh, when you talk about the cost and how to present a business case to executives, I think it can be very powerful.
yeah. Yeah, and of course we invite everybody. We'll do that also 1 month from now, talking about other advanced capabilities and advanced approaches to protecting data. So yeah, so looking forward doing that again with you, Ulf, sooner than later.
Thank you.
Mm,
And I'm looking forward to our next session
thank
coming
you.
up.
Mm.
I think it's in about a month, right?
In about a month, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ulf. Thank you for spending time with us. And thank you for all of you participants in this webinar. Looking forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Bye bye.